But as much as tourists and all of those of us who work and live here love seeing condors at close range, if condors are to survive in today's world, they have to learn to be wary around people. Condors spend a lot of their time outside the national parks, and an unwary condor can quickly get itself into trouble. As a result, we tried to be on hand whenever young condors first encountered people so that we could teach them that people are unpredictable and dangerous. We hazed the birds away from people and human structures by chasing them, yelling at them, throwing handfuls of gravel or sticks at them, anything to teach them that people are a threat. And I used to be shocked at what I would do to scare off these condors. I never thought, being a biologist meant harassing an endangered species, but it was tough love, but it was important. Over time, this consistent and persistent hazing of unwary condors led to dramatically improved behavior of individual condors and also of the whole flock of condors. If a condor was particularly unwary or problematic, we usually recaptured it. It was then given a timeout in the flight pen, basically brought up to the Vermilion Cliffs and kept there to give it a little extra growing up time. And the length of its timeout usually depended on the severity of its poor behavior. So walking up to a tourist at Grand Canyon and trying to eat their shoelaces meant for a very long timeout. Very poor behavior. Recaptured condors, though, usually behave more appropriately after a little growing up time in captivity. Sometimes we had to retrap and re-release a condor multiple times before it finally became a successful free-flying condor. I suppose we were lucky in some ways that in the first 5 years of the program, we only had 5 condors shot. One condor shot. Unfortunately, in the fall of 2002, that changed. Over the summer and the fall, the condors started using a new portion of their range at the time, the Kaibab Plateau. And we were thrilled. The area is a national forest, it's fairly remote. The birds were finding a superabundance of food out there and basically doing everything that we had hoped and dreamed they would. They were staying away from people, finding food on their own, and frequenting a fairly remote area. Unfortunately, though, the area is one of the premier hunting areas in Arizona. And when hunting season started, what had been a remote area was suddenly inundated by hunters. And unfortunately, while 99.9% of them were incredibly respectful and responsible and obeyed the law, there were a couple who chose to break the law. Condor 258 was perched in a tree overlooking a deer carcass when he was shot. And we suspect that he was shot by a turkey hunter based on the timing of the incidents and the evidence found at the scene of the crime. This was a wonderful little bird, his first year out. He really had so much promise, so we were heartbroken when he was killed. Condor 186, within a month these 2 birds were killed. 186 had been recaptured and re-released for poor behavior multiple times and finally was behaving exactly as a wild condor should when he was shot with an arrow by a bow hunter and left to bleed to death on the forest floor. He also was perched above a deer carcass in a remote area, doing just what he should have been. Since we spent every day monitoring these birds since their arrival in Arizona, and we knew each one of their personalities intimately, these kind of losses were completely heart-wrenching. After these 2 deaths, though, we worked closely with federal and state agencies to educate the hunters about the condors up on the Kaibab Plateau. And since those efforts, we know of no condors that have been shot in Arizona, though several condors have disappeared and may have died that way. Despite doing everything that we could to protect the condors and help them be successful in today's world, there is little that those of us working with them in the field could do to protect them from the greatest threat to their well-being, namely lead poisoning. When condors scavenge on dead animals, they may ingest lead shot or lead bullet fragments if the carcass they're feeding on was shot. And this is an X-ray of a condor with lead shot in its digestive system. These are the lead pellets. More often, condors inadvertently ingest lead bullet fragments when feeding on hunter-killed animals. Condors are especially vulnerable to lead poisoning because they don't regurgitate pellets of fur and bone on a regular basis the way hawks and eagles do. And they also have incredibly acidic digestive juices that are good at breaking down minute particles of lead. Lead bullets can lose as much as 30% of their mass upon impact, leaving a scatter of lead fragments in the animal. Peregrine Fund biologists conducted a study in Wyoming in which they x-rayed legally harvested white-tailed deer. And every whole and eviscerated deer carcass killed killed with lead-based bullets contained lead bullet fragments. In fact, 74% of them showed more than 100 visible lead fragments on an X-ray. Condors aren't the only animals that are susceptible to lead poisoning, although, as I mentioned, they are very vulnerable to it. Opportunistic scavengers like bald eagles and golden eagles also are at risk. A study in the 1980s found that 35% of the golden eagles in the Condors range in California had elevated lead levels. And 20% of the roughly 100 eagles that are treated each year at the University of Minnesota Raptor Center have lead poisoning. Recent studies have also shown elevated lead levels and potential exposure from lead ammunition fragments in ravens and other and raptor species as well. So what about humans? What about when we eat hunter-killed deer? Are we ingesting lead? Based on our research with condors, scientists are convinced that we do. Every condor biologist that I know that hunts, and there are many of them, use non-lead ammunition now because they're concerned as much about the human health threat as they are about the condors. But many hunting groups will still insist that there's no risk to humans. Well, in March of this year, a North Dakota doctor decided to investigate this matter for himself. He'd heard about lead poisoning in condors and wanted to see if there was a human health threat. He gathered packages of venison that had been donated to local food banks by hunters. He x-rayed 99 packages of meat. 53 of them contained lead fragments. That's 53% of them. And this is a photo of one of those venison packages that had been packaged for human consumption. The little white specks are fragments of lead. Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, neighboring states to North Dakota, became concerned. They followed suit, and they x-rayed the venison that was donated to their food banks. In Minnesota, they confirmed lead fragments in 76 of 299 samples. That's over 25%. In Iowa, didn't seem to take it as seriously. They tested only 10 samples. They found very low levels of lead in 2 of them, but they decided the levels weren't high enough to warrant destroying the remaining venison donations. We worry about our children's toys having lead in them, but meanwhile, many, many people are feeding their families game meat and potentially lead. They're thinking they're doing something healthy for their families, but it looks like that may not be the case. I have a friend, or a friend of a coworker of mine who got pregnant, and she decided she didn't want to eat hormone-laced beef during her pregnancy, so she decided she wanted to eat game meat during her pregnancy because she thought it was healthier. This woman had no idea that by doing that, she was putting her baby's long-term health at risk. Many hunters and lobby groups like Safari Club International will tell you that there's no cause for concern. We've been hunting with lead bullets for years, and no one's the worse for it. But the effects of lead can be subtle in people. It can lead to lower IQs, learning disabilities, and things like that. We are really good at ignoring warning signs that things in our environment are dangerous. We've known that lead bullet fragments are killing California condors since the 1980s. It's hard to imagine a bigger, blacker canary in the coal mine than California condor, but that's essentially what we've been doing. And I think and hope that people will start paying attention to this and taking this issue more seriously. So it's for the sake of your loved ones and people that you know, friends that you know, tell people to hunt with non-lead ammunition. This Osborn's X bullet that I have pictured here is a solid copper bullet that's being widely praised by professional hunters. Unlike lead bullets, which fragment, the copper bullets maintain their integrity and they fold as opposed to fragmenting. The Barnes X also penetrates the animal better, so oftentimes the bullet just passes right through the animal as well, which is beneficial. In price, it's comparable to higher-end ammunition. Hunting with the Barnes X bullet or similar bullets that don't fragment will benefit wildlife and also the health of those who eat game meat. But to get back to condors, how did we deal with lead exposure in condors? For starters, condors in Arizona and California are fed stillborn dairy calves at all the release sites. The supplementary food is in part for the youngsters who may not yet be adept at foraging, but it also provides a clean, lead-free food source for the older birds. Calf carcasses are carried out to the cliff rim at night while the birds are sleeping, so they don't associate the food that they find the next morning with human caretakers. And that was one of the delights of the job, carrying dead calves on your back with these beautifully modified garbage can backpacks. Probably the only part of the job I don't miss desperately.